Welcome to Footprints of Pacifica. Recently, we had a wonderful opportunity to have a quarterly meeting at the Dollar Radio station here in Pacifica. This is the former headquarters of Dollar Radio. This is where Admiral Byrd sent the word that he had actually discovered the South Pole. Now it's a private residence, and we had a wonderful opportunity to have a meeting with great guests. Enjoy.
We want to, first of all, also thank Joan Levin for the wonderful hospitality. We're just so pleased to be here. And thanks to all of you. The book itself, which, as Kathleen said, will be available later, is the story of the Pacific Mail Steamship Company, which started in 1848, bringing miners to the gold rush from Panama. Would-be miners who had come down from New York and the east coast to Panama, crossed the isthmus, and then came up to San Francisco on ships like this with side paddle wheels. This is what they look like. So the book covers a period from 1848 through the dollar line in about 1925, through the transition from dollar line into APL, American President lines. So basically what you're seeing is 160 years, because that's what it is this year, from side paddle wheelers to container ships. And as far as Heidi, who we're very pleased to have as a special guest today, she, as Jerry said, is the great-granddaughter of Robert Dollar and the granddaughter of Stanley Dollar, who also ran the company after Robert. And this is the Stanley Dollar, the ship named after Stanley Dollar right here. I hope you can see it. It's a China trade painting of the ship, which means it was painted as it pulled into the Hong Kong harbor by Chinese who had already painted the sky and the sea. And they would say to the captain, "Do you want me to paint your ship? Which sky and sea do you like best?" Captain would pick out the painting, and they would insert the ship. So that's a China trade ship painting made of the Robert Dollar, of the Stanley Dollar, just about 1906 or so at the time the ship entered service. The two main elements for which the Pacific Mail Steamship Company is most famous are the one I mentioned, which was bringing miners to the gold rush, and later starting the first trans-Pacific service, regular service, from San Francisco to Asia. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Bob, who's going to tell us a little bit of the history.
Thank you, Steve. We are delighted to be here. Well, through the 19th century, Pacific Mail kept building bigger and larger ships, always the best of their class, going from the wooden side wheelers to iron screw steamers and then steel steamers. They also changed ownership, finally coming under control of the Southern Pacific Railroad, which in 1915 decided to go out of business and started selling off the ships in the company. W.R. Grayson Company ended up with it, and with their ships they continued Pacific Mail service, and in 1921 began round-the-world service with 5 president-named ships. In 1925 there's a change. There was this Scottish chap with lots of sense which he rounded off into the name of Dollar. Robert Dollar, 1844 to 1932, to give you his dates, was certainly the epitome of the canny, thrifty Scot. He was astute, aggressive, and enthusiastic. He had a nice white goatee, very direct speech, and he was a diplomat. He could influence whomever he needed to influence. Well, by 1902, he had the Dollar Steamship Company with 10 steam lumber schooners because he had a good lumber business up and down the coast. And he then gradually went into shipping. So he looked in the Asia trade. Of course, he had the cargoes from California to the Orient, which was lumber. So soon Robert Dollar was shipping Japanese oak railroad ties to the Southern Pacific Railroad in competition with the Southern Pacific Railroad's own steamship line, the Pacific Mail Steamship Company. So that shows you what sort of guy Robert Dollar was. He could beat the SP at its own game. And in 1911, Dollar brought in the first cargo of Philippine mahogany. And on his ability for cargoes, by 1929, when he had round-the-world service, he'd pick up valuable way cargoes, which were always needed, such as tin and rubber. Before Robert Dollar, it took about 65 days to get rubber or tin to New York. He cut the time to 40 days. So you can see he certainly knows what he's doing. Meanwhile, 1921, W.R. Grace, as I mentioned, started round-the-world service with these 5 president-named ships. 1924, Robert Dollar did the same with 7, they called them 502s because that was their length, which are a combination freight and passenger ships, being the presidents Adams, Garfield, Harrison, Hayes, Monroe, Polk, and Van Buren. Some sort of slimy presidents there, but he didn't name them. And they would travel at 14 knots. Well, in 1925, the United States Shipping Board was going to sell off some of the U.S. shipping, namely what were called 535s. These are 14,000-ton ships. And these, they carried 257 first class, 300 steerage passengers, 11,000 tons of cargo, and went at 16 knots. Well, W.R. Grace had them. The presidents Cleveland, Lincoln, Pierce, Taft, and Wilson. But, the Grace Company didn't really have the heart and the enthusiasm. And R. Stanley Dollar, the son of Robert, was an exceedingly skilled negotiator. He was friends with the committee. Well, just look at Heidi here. She's the epitome of the Dollar personality. You don't get any better than that. So when push came to shove, Dollar outmaneuvered Grace and got these ships. Dollar got them for about $1 million each. They cost the government $5 million. As I said, he was a canny Scot. He also brought in Herbert and Mortimer Fleischacker of the Anglo-California Bank, and they invested in the Pacific Steamship Company, known as the Admiral Line, and became the largest stockholder. So essentially you had an interlocking group here. For the Coastal Service, the Pacific Steamship Company, in 1931, J. Harold Dollar, another son, became president. For the Asian and Oriental Service, you had the Admiral Oriental Mail Company, which then became the American Mail Line when they got a government mail contract. It was another subsidiary. So they had these 535s. You could get weekly service out of San Francisco, every 2 weeks out of Seattle. And as you were going around the world, if you wanted to stay at a place, you could get off and wait 2 weeks for the next Dollar ship and get on and continue your trip. Deja vu, 1929 and 30, the Dollar bought the 15,000-ton Manchuria and Mongolia, which had been previous Pacific Mail ships. They became the Presidents Johnson and Fillmore. 1931, they were supposed to build 4 ships under the mail contract, but this was a depression, so they built 2. The Presidents Hoover and Coolidge. We have the vacuum cleaner right up front, right, Steve? The Hoover? These are 654 feet, 22,000 tons, could go 21 knots, carry 1,000 passengers among 4 classes. In fact, the Coolidge in 1937 made the trip from San Francisco to Yokohama in 9.5 days, roughly, which was less by more than half of the 22 days it took for the wooden paddlers in 1867. These ships also had 20 lifeboats with shortwave radios, each with a 1,000-mile range. Because in radio, our Stanley Dollar was a pioneer. And this is where Jerry Crow can beat on me, because I don't know anything about radio. I wouldn't even know what a radio station house looked like if I were looking at one.
You are.
That's the point, Steve. Anyway, he bought shortwave patents because with shortwave radio you could get clear signals. And he bought the patents of Frederick G. Simpson of Seattle and formed the Pacific Radio Company and Globe Wireless and got certain shortwave radio links, wavelengths from the government. Then with Ralph Heinz, there was further development in sending and receiving. So by 1929, Dollar Radio had transmitters and offices in here, Los Angeles, Seattle, Manila, Guam, Honolulu, Garden City, New Jersey, and Long Island. So essentially it had a worldwide radio system, which of course began right where we're sitting. Well, the Depression whacked the hell out of everything. There was all sorts of debt kept piling up, both to the federal government and to the Fleischhackers Bank. They'd cut costs of maintenance. The ships were 14 years old. There were high executive salaries. There was high wages, because this was the days of Harry Bridges and the longshoremen. 1933, the government did oversight through the United States Shipping Board, which became the Marine Commission. 1937, the Admiral Lines collapsed. 1937 also, the Hoover became scrap metal off of Taiwan when it ran aground at night. So essentially in 1938, the Maritime Commission took over the Dollar Lines and called it American President Lines. The Dollars, though, even though they were in great debt to the government, paid it all back through the lumber business. They'd hoped to get back their stocks of the steamship company, but the government, being the government, did all sorts of rigmaroles, and they never did. But following the Dollar Line, we have the American President Lines. So to your great relief, following me, we have Steve Potash.
Well, following you, we have Heidi, who's going to give us a couple of reminiscences about shipping and being around, I guess mainly her grandfather. A little bit, I hope, about her great-grandfather.
Yeah. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you. It's education for me too, because I spent a lot of time with my grandfather, whose name was Stanley Dollar, R. Stanley Dollar. And so I knew things from a child's perspective. So as you hear me today, it's going to be from my experience as a child, not from the mature adult that you see. I guess like everybody else, I heard many stories about my great-grandfather, who was referred to as Grandfather Dollar. Other people called him Captain Robert Dollar, but we only called him Grandfather Dollar. And heard about some of the stories that most of you have probably heard, that at 12 years old, his mother died from alcoholism, and his home life was not happy. So he got on a boat and ship, and sailed to Canada. And when he arrived in Canada, he had no money, so he had to get a job, and he worked his way across Canada. He got a job as an assistant cook in a lumber mill, and so he was only allowed to peel potatoes. But he stayed there long enough to learn about other jobs, and from that place he traveled to other lumber mills to learn the trade. And he did learn the trade, and he saved his money, and he purchased other mills, and he went bankrupt 3 times. But he made his way all the way over to the Oregon area, and there he did buy a mill and did very well with that. I think it says a lot about him. Courageous, brave. I wouldn't go at 12 years old anywhere. And he loved being involved with the community. He was religious. He was very generous and tithed 10% of his income to the church, the Presbyterian Church. He had tremendous creativity and very high motivation. So really most of his life he worked, and he worked until almost the day he died, as you were describing. Because he viewed himself sort of as an orphan. He left home. He had no family. He was involved with creating Sunny Hills in San Anselmo, California. Originally, it was for orphan boys, but now it's different. It's for kids that have emotional problems. So that was a great gift that he really gave to the community in addition to the church. There was a story about him giving the church a whole set of Canton, like 50 plates and 50 dessert plates and cups and saucers and vegetable dishes, everything. So from Grandfather Dollar, his son, Stanley Dollar, I did spend a lot of time with, as well as my brother did. And my brother would have been here, but he passed away in June. And he was very excited about this group and coming here and talking. So with Stanley Dollar, whom I called Pops, and I spent time with him at Tahoe. We had a house at Tahoe. And he celebrated his birthday up there every year, and it was July the 6th. And so my job with my grandmother was to cut boughs off of the pine trees and tie them on a chair, so he would be the special birthday boy. And we tied it with red, white, and blue ribbon, and he always talked about the shipping. And it was a very fun time. And then he would leave for San Francisco after his birthday, and then my parents were there, and we spent the month up at Tahoe. One fun thing that we did was went to New York, and I went with my grandparents. Actually, I went with my grandmother. My grandfather flew in an airplane, and my grandmother hated flying, so we drove across the U.S. It took 4.5 days, and we arrived in New York and met him. And then my grandmother would like to go shopping and do other things, so I was asked to go with my grandfather to his office. So I did, and I went the whole week. And in the morning, when we arrived, I received a yellow legal pad with a very sharp pencil that had a new eraser, and that was my work. And then I was happy doing that, and then in a little while he went over and showed me what they call the teletype machine. For me it was magic, It was, they received messages from offices all over where they were. And I thought that was just the most exciting thing I'd ever seen in my life. And at that time, he did talk about the importance of getting messages or communication. I wasn't really clear about communication because I was 8 or 9, but it sounded like a really good idea, and that was really fun. And he also did that once in San Francisco, but in New York, the vice president of the company was asked to take me out for the afternoon, and so we would go see movies. And part of my job was to get the New Yorker, review the reviews, read the reviews, and go to the movies. So that was my work in New York. My grandfather talked a lot about the shipping, but what I really could understand was when we were at Tahoe, boats were a big attraction. And we had several boats, and he drove boats, and he talked about ships, and so that was sort of my memory of that. My uncle, Stan Dollar, was a boat racer, and he used to race in the Gold Cup races with these huge hydroplanes, and I remember seeing that, and that was very exciting. It wasn't a ship, but it was the same theme as a boat. My brother also did a lot of boat racing, and he loved that, and so he also actually did work at the Robert Dollar Company, and he was, if you were here, he would talk about that, but I don't have that information. So some of the fun reminiscences of my grandfather Pops was dinners, family dinners, and he loved that. And he would really teach us all about a work ethic, that it's really important to work and make a contribution to the community, and in whatever you liked, but something that would benefit other people. And he truly believed that, and that really, I think, originated from his father. And that's something that we all know in the family and dearly cherish. And then the other fun thing that I will close with was he had such a fun personality and was very playful. And at that time I was learning ballet, and so I was showing him first position, second position, third position, and so on. And so he told me that he wanted to learn too. So we both did my ballet steps. And then after that, he said, well, he would like to show me what he had learned from me with the ballet steps. So he told me he was going to do the monkey dance for me. And he did. And it was such a special, fun treat and very memorable, because here I am telling you about it. So those are a few little stories that I have, and thank you definitely for having me. And I'll pass this on.
Oh, Heidi, thank you so much. That adds so much dimension. So to continue the story a little bit, in 1938, Dollar Line transitioned into a government-operated company which came to be known as APL. Came to be known as American President Lines, which has become known as APL. The little story about the transition is very interesting. Can you all see this picture here right in front of our table? This picture was probably made in 1937. There were two dollar sister ships, the President Hoover and the President Coolidge. And this was actually a picture of the President Hoover, and it was used as a promotional picture for the Dollar Line. The Hoover ran aground, as Bob told you, in 1937, I think it was, and when the transition to APL took place in 1938, here's an APL marketing department. They have one ship left of the two sister ships. So what did? They didn't want to throw out the posters. They painted out the dollar signs on the smokestacks, and if you look very, very closely, you'll see the top curve of a dollar sign on the aft stack, and they painted over it the eagles of American president lines. And just in case I wasn't convinced that that's what happened to this picture, I took my fingernail and scratched out the white paint on the hull of the ship where it said underneath the paint, President Hoover. So the ship that had been grounded, they painted over its name, and then they could continue to use the picture to promote the other ship, the Coolidge.
My father went to work with the Dollar Lines in 1925 when he was a sophomore in Sacred Heart. He went as an ensign, and then he went to college and he went back to work it started as a sailor. And in 1938, when the government took over the Dollar Lines, you haven't mentioned how paternalistic the dollars were, because they made sure every single sailor, every mate, every captain got a job. They put them all over the world in jobs so they wouldn't lose their livelihood between the time that the dollar, before it became the American President Lines. And the people that worked for the Dollar Lines adored your family, because they used to have a building, I don't know where they live, but every time they came in from sea, there would be a big sign on the building saying, "Welcome President Hoover, welcome President Cleveland," on the thing, and they always looked for that. And it was a different kind of corporation than you have today. It was very paternalistic. Everybody took care of everybody else, and it's something that we'll never see again in America.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for saying that. Yeah, I didn't know that story that you just said.
Oh yeah, they sent my father to Seattle. He worked in Seattle as a seaman, just to keep his food on the table.
Yeah. Wonderful, thank you.
Huh? Oh, we ended up as the captain of APL. Yeah.
He ended as a captain of APL. But just to add a footnote to that comment, when Robert Dollar died, his funeral was attended by the governor of California, the mayor of San Francisco, and 3,000 people. So that may give you a hint that he was widely, widely admired.
The ocean.